Lucy.
And I'm Michelle.
Welcome to another episode of Tudoriferous, the biographical podcast that examines lives in the Tudor era.
And today, Edward Woodville. I don't know why I say that like Halloween, but nothing goes well for the Woodvilles.
It's just Edward today. We've done all the other little Woodvilles last week.
Yes.
So we're focusing on Edward. Come with me. We haven't done that for a bit.
No, I have not done that.
And I would say by the time this comes out, it will have been a year since we've given anyone Tudorlicious.
Wow.
Yes, and there was us worrying that we're giving it to everybody.
To everybody.
And in fact, we're sort of handing it out very doing a Henry VII, keeping them all to ourselves. Well, we'll see if he gets it. Come with me if you will. Henry VII is issuing a proclamation. I want to make it perfectly clear to one and all, no one, I repeat, no one, is to go to Brittany to fight on pain of death. Did you get that? On pain of death. We don't want to antagonise the French, so we're keeping out of this one. Everyone understand? Do not go to fight in Brittany. You're all dismissed. Then, turning to Edward Woodville, have you mustered enough men? The ships are ready. And if anyone asks, I know nothing about this.
Oh, see, and I thought he went rogue.
We don't know.
Oh, okay.
We don't know. I think it must have been on a need-to-know basis. We don't know.
Nothing in writing.
No.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it.
Yes. Yes, is to ignore everything I say. I feel we're being plunged back into the Middle Ages with Edward Woodville, because some parts of Henry's court seem to have left the Middle Ages and edged tentatively into the Renaissance, but not this man. And I'm not quite sure why I feel that, except that some of these characters exude modernity and some exude medievalness.
Okay.
He's described in various places as the last great chivalric knight, so that's probably why I'm placing him in the Middle Ages.
Ah, okay. Yeah, because it's an awkward time period. We keep talking about how the Renaissance doesn't really happen until Henry VIII, but it wasn't just a hard line. It was sort of a trickle effect. Yeah,
and we definitely know how much communication there is across Europe.
Yeah.
We're not, no man is an island, even England.
Yeah.
Which is an island.
Which is an island.
Edward Woodville, I'm going to keep calling him Edward Woodville, even though it's a bit of a tongue twister, because we've got Edward IV, we've got other Edwards. It's just confusing. Edward Woodville, it is a tongue twister. Edward Woodville was the youngest son of Sir Richard Woodville and Jacquetta of Luxembourg, as we saw last week. Most famous, I think, for not being a Margaret or a Mary or an Elizabeth. She's a Jacquetta.
Yeah.
And for being a witch.
Poor woman.
It's a bit like Juana the Mad. She's only famous for one thing.
Yes.
And we're not even sure she is. Well, we're pretty sure she's not a witch. We're not sure about Juana yet. If King Edward IV hadn't spotted a beautiful woman lurking under an oak tree, Edward Woodville's life would have been very different.
Right.
He was born around the time that Richard of York moved in to fill the gap left by Henry VI's mental illness, eventually triggering the War of the Roses. So somewhere between 1454 and 1458.
It's always surprising that we don't have a birth date. It's just... That's
such a basic thing now.
Yeah. Everybody has it. It's required for any kind of documentation or anything you do. And your birth date is?
Yeah, as soon as you go to the doctor, before they ask your name, they ask your birth date.
Yes.
I don't know if that's everywhere, but certainly here they do.
They do if it's over the phone to confirm that you're there. Same with pharmacists. You guys call them chemists.
When Edward IV first went to Grafton, home of the Woodvilles, including Elizabeth Woodville, the purpose of his visit, our Edward would have been about 6. So
Little guy. That's quite the difference in ages for the kids. Oh, yeah, she had 14, didn't she?
She had a lot of children, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably one of those awkward things where they're left waiting for Elizabeth to come, and Edward tousles the little boy's hair, and they do a bit of pretend boxing. And then Edward says, so what do you want to be when you grow up?
The king. Don't say that.
And then you've got a bit of an awkward silence while Edward waits for another grown-up to come because he's exhausted his child talk. He would have been about 9 when he watched his brother Anthony fight the famous bastard of Burgundy at the tournament. In 1466, it seemed that Edward Woodville was destined for the church, like his brother Lionel, and he was tonsured, and the following year became prebend of Leighton Buzzard.
Oh, that's a surprise.
Yeah, it was a surprise to me until yesterday when I came across a paper about it. So I'd written it all up, and then I saw early years of Edward Woodville, and it mentioned that he became a priest, and I thought, oh no, I've missed all this out. But yeah, no, it's all right. It's in there. It's possible that Edward IV intended Richard Woodville for the church as well.
Just to get rid of them?
Well, I wonder that. He'd made very good marriages for his sisters-in-law.
Yeah.
Was he trying to make sure the brothers-in-law didn't become potential rivals by sort of securing them within the church?
Oh. Except with that archbishop that's a battler. That doesn't really help.
I was just thinking about, yes, George Neville. And we've come across some pretty dodgy priests. And some highly ambitious priests.
Yes.
Yeah, the boys weren't given titles that could be passed on to their descendants. And they weren't given impressive marriages apart from John. And that obviously had
consequences.
Economic overtones, yeah.
Interesting. I had assumed that he would have set up all of the family, not just the females. Interesting.
Well, he did. He set them up in the church.
Yeah, but that's not something that they could pass on to their kids. Like, was that sort of his way of trying to get the people around him to stop griping about the fact that he married a Woodville? Look, I'm not giving anything to the brothers. They're not getting titles. They're not getting anything that they can pass on to children. We'll put them into churches so that they can't, actually have legitimate children. They could still have children, but maybe.
Possibly, yes. I mean, yes, he'd face a lot of backlash against the Woodville, so maybe, that was a way of sugaring the pill a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Especially after he'd married off all the girls.
Yeah.
Well, the change of plan for Edward Woodville seems to have come about since Anthony didn't have any legitimate children. The next in line for the title of Earl Rivers would be Richard, and he wasn't married, and I don't know why it was assumed he wouldn't be married. We can't tell. Edward was brought out of his clerical career path since there was a risk of the Woodville family fizzling out. And I would have thought that would come from Elizabeth Woodville rather than King Edward, because I can't really see why he should have been the slightest bit bothered that the Woodville line would fizzle out.
Yeah.
And given Edward Woodville's enjoyment of all things military, I don't think the ecclesiastical life would have suited him particularly well. I think he's a bit of a Cesare Borgia there.
Oh, that evil?
Not in the sense of evil, but in the sense of being plonked in the wrong job.
Wrong job. Okay, good.
No! No, he's not evil. Well, no more evil than any of the other people we've done. 1467, he went with Anthony as his page to Brittany. I think that's why it made it feel so medieval, because you've got your page.
Oh,
and
right.
Yeah, trotting along. There's sort of Sancho Panza feel to it. And they went to Brittany to help the Bretons against the French. And they still went, even though there was a supposed truce between Louis XI and Duke Francis of Brittany. At the age of about 12, Edward Woodville went from page to squire. It's not certain whom he squired for, but it's assumed it was Anthony.
Okay.
If so, he'd have been with him in naval battles against Warwick's fleet.
Oh, goodness, that's one of the least things I'd want to do. If I had to go into the military, the Navy was not my choice.
The Navy seems to be Edward's choice.
Really?
Yeah, that's what he seems to excel at.
But that's insane.
Yes.
You're gonna die or get items of body cut off. And if you're lucky, you don't sink.
Yeah, I think he's a bit of an adrenaline junkie, maybe.
Pick a different adrenaline junkie phase. Like, go cliff diving or something. Don't go into the Navy.
They can't swim. If they cliff dive, they're certainly going to die.
Oops.
In 1472, Edward Woodville was knighted, and the vow he made would be not to accept false judgment, not to be party to any sort of treason, which is, fairly the basics, you'd think, to honour all women, and to hear Mass every day and fast on Fridays where possible, it says, which I quite liked. If it's not too much trouble.
Yes.
He kept some of those, shall we say.
Hopefully the honouring women was one of them. No, apparently not. Oh, dear.
We don't know. It might be hearsay. Just before Edward IV set off to confront Louis XI, Edward Woodville and Richard Grey, the son from Elizabeth Woodville's first marriage, were made Knights of the Bath, and Thomas, her first son, was made Marquis of Dorset. And this was the occasion when King Edward went over, possibly actually intending to fight, unlike Henry VII. Well, we think Henry VII, but he took the money instead.
Yep.
Comines said that the English were naive and had no idea that Louis XI had taken them for a ride. The Treaty of Picardy was thrashed out, and both Edward IV and Louis XI were happy with the outcome, which almost certainly means that it was more advantageous to Louis, I should think.
Yes.
Louis very sensibly arranged for the English to have unlimited alcohol, which must surely have clouded their judgment quite a lot. Never give the English unlimited alcohol. An interesting side note I found, Edward IV was so pleased with the Treaty of Picardy that he commissioned the building of St George's Chapel in Windsor and had the terms of the treaty carved into the misericords. Oh. And if people don't know what misericords are, if you go to a cathedral and lift up the seats in the choir, you'll see there's a ledge, and it's always beautifully carved with a little, what they're like in medieval times. They can't leave anything alone. They're beautiful little carvings underneath the ledge that depict all sorts of things. Some things which they knew that the vicar wouldn't want to see, so they hide them under there. And the purpose of it is that the choir or the priest, the monks or whatever they are, can sit while they look as if they're standing. You sort of park your buttocks on that.
Oh.
And take a bit of weight off.
Okay.
Some of those in St George's Chapel apparently had the terms of the treaty carved into them, but I couldn't find those. But there is a misericord showing the meeting at Picardy between King Edward and King Louis and their bosom buddies. Yeah. January 1478, Edward Woodville was with his brother in the tournament to celebrate the wedding of Edward IV's 4-year-old son. His horses were dressed in crimson cloth and his servants in blue and tawny. One of Edward Woodville's horses was hurt, but he gallantly jumped on another and continued the fight. So that's nice. Yeah, tournaments were really brutal affairs, not just for the people, but definitely for the horses. Mm-hmm. Edward Woodville's first act of diplomacy in his own right was to travel to Scotland to negotiate a marriage contract between his brother Anthony, who just seemed to be hawked around all the eligible ladies, and King James III's sister. And we heard that the betrothal was later abandoned. But anyway, Edward Woodville's actually getting some diplomatic practice in. His next appearance in the records, we see him collecting Margaret of Burgundy and bringing her back for her holiday in England.
Sounds so funny. He collects her.
So shoves her in his suitcase and wheels her back.
Packs her in plastic, makes sure she doesn't turn it.
1482, Edward Woodville accompanied Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and Francis Lovell to the campaign in Scotland, and Edward Woodville was made a Knight Banneret as they were heading towards Edinburgh. So at that time, Gloucester and Woodville on the same side. Mm-hmm. To get a feeling for Edward's character, and to see how he was keeping up with those vows he made when he was knighted, the chronicler Mancini described King Edward IV, quote, "He was licentious in the extreme. Moreover, it was said that he had been most insolent to numerous women, after he had seduced them. For as soon as he grew weary of the dalliances, he gave up the ladies, much against their will, to other courtiers. Yeah, just passed them on.
Oh, God.
He pursued with no discrimination the married and the unmarried, the noble and the lowly. However, he took none by force. So what a saint.
Oh.
He overcame all by money and promises, and having conquered them, he dismissed them.
Oh.
Although he had many promoters and companions of his vices, the most important and especial were the relatives of the Queen, her 2 sons, and one of her brothers, unquote.
What the
And that brother was Edward Woodville.
So you're going to encourage your stepfather to step out on your mother?
I don't think he needed a lot of encouragement.
Yeah, but shouldn't you be saying, "Hey, Mom, she's over there"? What the hell?
I think it's all lads together, isn't it?
Oh, that's gross.
I'm not condoning it. No, it's all right. It's just all lads together. It's locker talk. Early 1483, Louis XI reneged on the Treaty of Picardy. And if you go to St George's Chapel in Windsor and inspect the record there, that one that showed Louis and Edward bosom buddies after the Treaty of Picardy, Louis's head is missing. So I don't know whether Edward went there in a complete rage and ripped his head off, but somebody did. At this point, Edward Woodville was captain of Portchester Castle. And Edward IV, incensed at Louis's duplicity, what did he expect? It was Louis, I mean, honestly, started to prepare for war with France. Edward Woodville was given a budget of £3,269, 14 shillings and threepence to assemble 2,000 men. But this plan had to be aborted when, in the spring, unexpectedly, Edward IV fell ill and died.
Thank goodness. Good riddance to bad rubbish.
Well, Edward Woodville accompanied the coffin, and it was at this funeral that we ended up in a scuffle over precedence.
Jeez, right.
Without the king, the war was a non-starter, so a squadron of ships was commissioned just to stop the incursion by the French. I don't know whether the French intended any incursions, but that's what he went to do. The commander of the fleet was Edward Woodville, since he was, quote, a bold and valiant captain, unquote. And the fleet was between 4 and 6 ships, incidentally. So there you go. That's the official number for a fleet.
Fleetette.
Between 4 and 6.
4 ships is a fleetette. I don't care what you say.
It took Edward Woodville just 9 days to man and provision these ships. And then he spent a joyous 10 days chasing and catching French merchant ships. Merchant ships, that is.
Not military.
Is that incursions? That sounds more like piracy to me.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, I must admit, the first time I read that went over my head a bit, and then I suddenly read it again and thought, hang on a minute.
So, would he be technically a privateer then?
Was there a distinction at this time? I sort of feel that pirate-privateer bit came in Elizabethan times.
I
but
actually
that's just
don't know. I don't
feeling.
know anything about the history of piracy and privateers. Maybe one day we'll actually get there. I'll be able to answer that question.
Yep. Well, everyone can look forward to that. Richard of Gloucester claimed that the Woodvilles had denuded the treasury, including Edward Woodville taking money for his fleet, because they were, quote, greedy, selfish and unpublic-spirited, unquote. And actually, there was hardly any money in the treasury, as we heard, since much of it had gone for this war. So in a way, Gloucester was right. The money had gone to Edward Woodville, but for ostensibly legitimate reasons. He was given the money to fight the war with France. The fact that he then went and scoured the Channel for French merchants, maybe that wasn't quite in the remit.
So I wonder if he got to keep all the profits, and that was the real offense.
That's the real treasury.
Yes. You were supposed to pay us back.
Yeah, when I heard he was the last chivalric knight...
This does not feel like a chivalric knight to me.
No, it reminds me of the knight in Chaucer. And everybody thought loved chivalry and truth and honour and courtesy and all that, until Terry Jones, the Monty Python Terry Jones, wrote a book pointing out that every single battle that was listed was really a massacre and not at all a fair fight. And he suddenly realised he's not chivalric, he's just a mercenary thug. That's why Chaucer listed those particular battles, because they were so awful.
Ah.
And I'm beginning to get the same feeling with Edward Woodville, that he's hiding all this behind this great chivalric.
Now I'm going to have to find that
pretense.
Terry Jones book and then reread Chaucer.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
We heard all about the shenanigans with the Duke of Gloucester and Edward V last week. Anthony and Richard Grey were imprisoned and dispatched north. Edward V was put under Uncle Richard's protection. Gloucester sent word to East Anglia, the Isle of Wight and the southwest, telling people to be on their guard against an attack by Edward Woodville and his fleet. So he's accusing him of actually wanting to attack England.
Right.
Edward Woodville had convinced the council to make him admiral of the fleet in order, he said, to fight piracy in the English Channel, headed by Philippe de Crèvecoeur.
By being a pirate.
Fighting piracy with piracy. It doesn't seem to have been his intention to attack England, so it seems unlikely. And it also probably wasn't hard to get the council to agree to Edward's request, since, as we heard last week, the council was largely made up of Woodvilles. But maybe Richard of Gloucester was right to be worried about Edward Woodville, because on the 14th of May 1483, Edward sailed into Southampton and took £10,201 of English coin that he found on a ship. He was taking it in the name of the king, and that king, Edward V, not Richard III. He didn't just steal it. He signed an indenture, quote, "If it can be proved not forfeited unto the king, so Edward will repay the value of the said money in English merchandise within 3 months," unquote. So not stealing, borrowing. But you think, well, where do you get this merchandise from?
Yes.
A fleet headed by Edward Brampton, amongst others, was sent by Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and it found Edward Woodville in Southampton. And it was decided not to confront him. I'm not sure why not, but instead they rowed up to Edward Woodville's ships and told the crew that Woodville was a traitor. There was a bounty on his head, and any captain that sided with him would be outlawed, and the goods on the ship would be confiscated.
Oh.
Well, it's quite a good move. This split Edward Woodville's followers right down the middle.
Right.
The English stayed loyal to him, but the Genoese, who'd lent their ships with Genoese crews, had more to lose.
Yes.
Really. It's not their fight.
Nope.
They probably realised they'd blundered into something more dangerous than they'd thought, and now they wanted out.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to lose their ships and goods just by abandoning them. But whether Edward Woodville had foreseen this possibility or for some other reason, he had made sure that each of the Genoese ships had some English soldiers on them. So there was some sort of guard on the ship. So the Genoese captains concocted a cunning plan. And it's the usual plan involving English soldiers and copious amounts of alcohol. When the soldiers were good and drunk, the captain told them they were setting sail, and would they kindly all go down below so they didn't get in the way of preparations to sail, because they're soldiers, they're not sailors.
Yes.
The soldiers dutifully staggered down below deck, and then the soldiers were allowed up, one by one, bopped on the head and tied up.
That sounds like a cartoon.
It does, yes. I hope they were tied back to back with loads and loads of rope around them. Presumably as they came up through the hatch, there's a sort of... Genoese sailed away, and Edward Woodville's fleet was hopelessly confused about what was happening.
I would be too.
It broke up in pandemonium. So Edward was just left with 2 ships, the Trinity and the Falcon. The princes disappeared, Richard was made king, and Edward Woodville was floating aimlessly around the English Channel. What on earth was he to do next?
I wonder if things would have gone the same way if he had been on land. Because now, technically, he'd be invading.
I suppose
it would
so.
be harder to get in there to defend his nephew.
Yes, he might have thought he was doing the right thing by getting a fleet and everything, but it's not much use of it. All the problems were in London.
Yeah.
When he didn't go to England, he sailed to Brittany. In June 1483, he had with him 200 to 300 well-armed men and that 10,000 quid in cash. Now that Henry Tudor had soldiers, money and a fleet, albeit of only 2 ships now, he suddenly became a creditable force. And we said that we couldn't have done it first without John de Vere suddenly appearing over the horizon, and then later without the Stanleys changing sides. It seems also he couldn't have done it without Edward Woodville turning up with 2 fleets.
2
and
ships.
large quantities of money. Yeah, but 2 ships is better than no ships.
Yes. Interesting.
So the Wheel of Fortune has spun. A few years before, Anthony Woodville had been sent to get Henry and Jasper and bring them back to England, and now his brother Edward has joined them. Yeah, and now Richard III is demanding that Brittany return Henry, Jasper and Edward Woodville. Francis's reply was that he would love to help Richard in any way he could. He had Louis XI breathing down his neck to send Henry Tudor and his entourage to him. And he was afraid he might have to give in to Louis's demands. I mean, what could he do? He was just a little country facing the might of France. What's he going to do? He's going to have to send Henry to France. Now, if Richard were to help him fight against France, then they might be able to discuss that whole Tudor thing. Yeah, I do wonder if Duke Francis might be getting fed up with the English anyway. He'd taken in Jasper and Henry. He hadn't realised they'd end up 500 followers. I mean, these people just keep arriving.
Yes, and where are they going to go? And who is paying for them?
Well, he's paying a pension for several of them, including Edward Woodville.
Oh, jeez.
He's paying Edward £100 a month plus another 100 for his men. And it's all adding up, and it's causing friction between the English and the Bretons. And to be clear, Edward Woodville at this point was not there to make Henry Tudor king.
Oh.
He wanted to put his nephew, Edward V, back on the throne.
Right, because the boys are still in existence.
Well, nobody knows, so he just assumed, yeah. Henry Tudor was just a means to attack Richard. He wasn't an end in himself. And it must have been very hard for him and those like him when John de Vere turned up, because John de Vere consistently refused to accept Edward IV. So there must be some antagonism between the Yorkists and these dyed-in-the-wool Lancastrians. Mm-hmm. Although de Vere could have pointed out to Edward, you lot were Lancastrian not so very long ago. You only changed sides because you thought you weren't going to win.
Which you didn't.
No.
You were correct.
When Buckingham rose up against his erstwhile friend Richard, Henry and Jasper sailed over to join the rebellion, and there's no word of Edward Woodville being there, but they're hardly going to leave him behind, I wouldn't think.
Yeah.
Although, as we've heard, it wasn't an unmitigated success, and Henry and Jasper turned round and went back. Although Buckingham's rebellion failed, it did mean that more rebels sailed over to join Henry, Jasper and Edward Woodville, including the Marquis of Dorset, Edward's half-nephew. Well, that must have been a treat. Christmas Day, 1483 at Rennes Cathedral. And again, we have to assume Edward was there. He's a bit of a Francis Lovell. He probably was there, but nobody ever mentions him. Henry Tudor agreed to marry Elizabeth of York. Now, something occurred to me. At what point did Elizabeth agree to marry Henry? Presumably, she did have to agree.
Yes.
It would have been a bit of a disaster if they'd set it all up and then she'd just said, no. I'm not doing it. So he'd be breaking his vow. And we do hear quite a lot about women refusing to marry. Some of their parents have lined up. Mainly Henry, actually. We hear about people refusing to marry.
Yes.
How was her agreement passed on to Henry? Another thing, it was the following Christmas that Richard III started showing rather ununcly interest in Elizabeth.
Yeah, creepy.
Yes, and the following March that Richard's wife Anne died, leaving him free to pursue and then quickly deny any interest in his niece.
I have no interest in marrying my niece.
But surely Elizabeth must have been promised to marry Henry by that point. I mean, he's already made a vow to say, I will marry her.
Oh.
Can't quite grasp the timeline of
No.
when Elizabeth said. And if Henry had stood up in Wren Cathedral and announced it, that was going to get back to Richard.
Yeah, putting her in more danger. She could have quickly been married off to any noble. Or any commoner, really.
Anybody, yes. Oh, Richard.
I wonder how that... Oh, that would have scuppered a lot of plans, wouldn't it? If he had married her off to somebody.
He should have done it.
I refuse to say he'd take her because she's his niece. Like, please don't. Please don't. We've already had somebody marrying their sister. See, Patreon.
Yes. Oh, it all goes on Patreon. He should have married her to somebody else.
Yeah. That would have ended pretty much everything. His support from the Yorkists would be gone.
Yeah. Yes, that's what he should have done.
Yeah.
That was your big mistake, Richard.
Yep. You did plenty of little mistakes. That's a big one.
Apparently it's Richard's northern followers who pulled the plug on Richard's marriage plans with Elizabeth, if indeed there were any, because they were afraid she'd take revenge on him for Anthony's death.
Yeah.
You know, they'd be in bed and then suddenly a knife would appear out of nowhere and Richard would be vulnerable and that would be that. Mm-hmm. When Henry fled to France, Edward Woodville, Edward Poynings and the 6'8" John Chain were left behind in Brittany. Not just them, there are quite a few of them. But it's these three that were called to see Duke Francis, who then offered all the Englishmen safe passage to France, which is nice.
Get out.
Yes, off we go. Quick, quick, quick.
Get out, get out, get out, please. Yeah.
I can't afford you anymore.
Yeah, get out.
23rd of June, 1485, Richard III issued a proclamation against, quote, Jasper Tidder, son of Owen Tidder, calling himself the Earl of Pembroke, because he wasn't officially at that point, John, later Earl of Oxon, and Sir Edward Woodville, with other rebels and traitors who have chosen as their captain one Henry Tidder, unquote.
Tidder, the Tidder.
And they were, quote, rebels and traitors disabled and attainted by the authority of the High Court of Parliament, unquote. And if that weren't enough, he added, quote, many be known for open murderers, adulterers and extortioners, contrary to truth, honour and nature, unquote.
Ooh, them's some fighting words.
Yes. Yeah, if they're being told they're rebel and a traitor isn't enough. And they're murderers, adulterers and extortioners. They're really nasty people. You don't want them.
They're really nasty people.
The proclamation went on to say they'd had to flee for France because they'd done things in Brittany which were, quote, too greatly unnatural and abominable.
Oh.
So they've been effectively chucked out of Brittany and made to go to France. There's no evidence that Henry's crew did behave particularly badly. Well,
in the future, he does extort money from people through
yes.
Richard and Empson. So I'm going with that might have actually happened.
But he wasn't an adulterer, though.
No, he was not. At least not that we're aware of. He was unnaturally loyal to his wife.
Yes. Yeah, what a weirdo. When Henry landed at Milford Haven, Edward Woodville was obviously there too. We don't know, but he obviously was. And we don't know his position at Bosworth. But as leader of his own men, he'd have probably been in the vanguard. Following Henry VII's victory, Edward Woodville was reinstated in the castle and town of Portchester and made governor over Portsmouth. And he was given the captaincy of the Isle of Wight with the lordship of Carisbrooke Castle.
So Henry appreciated what he did, obviously.
Yes, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
The Woodville badge over the gate is still partly visible, although I looked at pictures, I couldn't see it. It just looked like a sort of blur. Maybe in the flesh you can see it more clearly. One of the perks of having jurisdiction over the Isle of Wight, which I found quite interesting, was, quote, wreck of the sea and other liberties, unquote.
Ah, piracy.
Well, is it piracy, or if a boat gets shipwrecked, you can go and...
take everything.
Just take it, yes.
Yeah, but the other things makes me think piracy.
Well, they were all pirates. Perhaps Edward Woodville and John de Vere bonded over their piracy exploits. Edward Woodville seems to have had remarkably little money of his own, not counting the 10,000 quid he commandeered
Which
in
wasn't
Southampton.
his own anyway.
No, and I don't know whether he paid back because it did say if he didn't pay it back, he'd pay it back in merchandise.
To who, though?
So I don't know what happened to that. Yeah. Well, the person who owned the boat where he found the money.
Found.
Well, he should have hidden it better, shouldn't
Yes.
he? He was just
Yeah,
asking
it's his
for trouble.
fault.
Yeah. Yeah, Edward was way down the line after several other siblings. He's not just the youngest son, but the youngest of many. So he wasn't really going to get money from his parents, I don't think. But Anthony, in his will, had written, I, Anthony Woodville, in the castle of Sheriff Hutton, well, yes, he was a prisoner there, bequeath the lands that were my first wife's, the Lady Scales, to my brother Sir Edward Woodville, unquote. So why was it given to Edward rather than one of the other brothers?
Oh.
I don't know, but I can make wild guesses, because that's what you do in history, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe he saw Edward as the brother most likely to follow in his footsteps.
Okay.
Literally, since he'd been his page and squire.
Right.
Maybe he thought Edward could do most with the money.
Or maybe he thought he's
That's-
never going to make it on his own. He desperately needs some help.
Maybe I just thought he looked at Edward and thought, that's my boy, really.
Yeah. Well, he didn't have any children, did he?
He didn't.
Yeah, so giving it to your brother is natural, I would think.
Yes, but it's Edward, not any of the others. Lionel was obviously doing all right. He was in the church. Richard we hear very little about. He's a very shadowy character. But yeah, he chose to give it to Edward. And it's thought that this gift of Scales family land, and that is that point that Edward started calling himself Lord Scales, although he was never actually given that title officially. It would have been up to Richard to bestow the title, and he wasn't going to do it.
Absolutely not.
No.
You're a traitor.
You think Jasper carried on calling himself Earl of Pembroke regardless, didn't it?
Yep.
So I think it's a way of saying, I don't accept you as my king, and I'm not going to take any notice of your pronouncements.
Yes.
And Edward never actually got the Scales land, because they went to the third cousins of Anthony's late wife for some reason.
Oh.
But he never seemed to contest it.
Oh.
I got the impression he was a rover. He didn't want to
Settle down into a single
settle
spot.
down. Yeah.
Or spots.
Yes. Dotted expensively across the country. Yeah, as soon as the wedding between Henry and Elizabeth of York was out the way, Edward Woodville asked permission to go and fight the Moors, like his brother had done.
Oh.
So he might have made a vow as well. He might have said,
If I make it
if
through
Henry
this.
Tudor wins. Yes. So he set off in 1486 for Spain. And by May he was outside the Moorish city of Loja. And Ferdinand and Isabella were there, busy bashing the infidel as usual. And everyone was really impressed with Edward Woodville. Peter Martyr, who we came across making commentaries on Columbus's voyages. I got a bit sidetracked with him. Yeah, not only did Peter Martyr go to the New World, but he also went to Egypt. So that's interesting. We haven't come across anybody going to Egypt before. Oh, well, he said that Edward Woodville, or Lord Scales, as he always described in these reports, was, quote, young, wealthy and high-born, and was attended by a beautiful train of household troops, 300 in number, armed after the fashion of their land with longbow and battle-axe, unquote.
But he's not highborn.
No, and he's not that wealthy either.
No.
But Ferdinand and Isabella must have been thrilled to see those English longbows, because they were quite...
Yes.
They did the trick, yeah.
Yes.
It seems that Edward and his men led the charge. Quote, he dismounted from his good steed and put himself at the head of his followers, armed himself en blanco, with their swords at their thighs and battle-axes in their hands. He dealt such terrible blows around him as filled even the hardy mountaineers of the north with astonishment, unquote.
So he's a berserker.
The hardy mountaineers, I presume it's the Swiss. Yes. En blanco, apparently it means having your weapons decorated.
Oh.
So they're really ornate.
Like bling.
Yeah, El Blingo.
Oh, bingo.
The Castilians were following close behind, and this is where an event occurs that we've come across before. He was climbing up the scaling ladder when he was hit by a stone, and he was knocked unconscious, and the surgeons then battled to save his life, which they did, but not his teeth.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, hit by a stone doesn't sound so bad, except sometimes they're like 20-pound stones, and they're being hurled down at you. Not just rolling down a hill, you get hit by it.
Yes, and it's not a little pebble.
No.
It's something that's going to knock your teeth out.
Yes, and your face in.
Sounded pretty nasty, actually.
Yeah.
Ferdinand and Isabella visited him and commiserated with him about his teeth. Sorry about your
You'll
teeth.
be on soup for the rest of your life, but here's some recipes.
Well, he replied with a joke.
A lisping joke, now that he has no teeth.
I don't think there are any quotes from him, so I don't have to do an accent.
Good.
Anyway, this is his joke. Quote, "Our Lord, who reared this fabric, has only opened a window in order to discern more readily what passes within," unquote. I don't get it.
You can see his food because he has no teeth.
Yeah, but that's... Do you want to see his food?
No, I do not.
No. Well, apparently they fell about, but no, I think it doesn't work. It doesn't pass through the ages, that one. After Locha had surrendered, Edward Woodville apparently astonished the Spanish royal family with his stupendous horsemanship. And Ferdinand called him, quote, "the remarkable Count of Scales," unquote.
Even though he's
Which just make him sound like a circus act.
Yes, it
doesn't
does.
it?
Barnum and Bailey.
And Isabella gave him 12 Andalusian horses, 2 beds with rich hangings, and some pavilions.
Wow.
Very inconvenient, given that he's got to drag them all back to England.
Yeah. But, Andalusians are stunning. They're beautiful. Do you know what I'm talking about? An Andalusian horse?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very, very sleek.
Yeah. Absolutely gorgeous animals.
Men who'd gone to Spain with Edward Woodville, and who had been taken prisoner in Spain, they were sent to Fez in Morocco, from where it seems only one of them returned.
You say Fez in Morocco, and I'm like, good food. That's the only thing I think of. I'll go there. Thank you. One survives. Ooh.
Don't go there as a prisoner. That's quite a nice story. His name was Petrus, and he fell in love with the jailer's daughter, and they eloped together to Spain, where they were married. So, yeah, it's a lovely story, but what about the rest of them?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I may be maligning Edward Woodville and Henry VII, but I couldn't find any attempt by them to try and negotiate the prisoners' returns. Do they owe him some duty of care for these people?
Apparently not.
Maybe it wasn't a thing that was done for a Christian country to negotiate with the Muslim one.
Yeah, no, how dare you? I guess you can't really negotiate with somebody who's not of the same faith, since they're heretics. That wouldn't look right by the church, I would think.
No. Well, sorry, lads. Also, I suppose they might have been made to convert, in which case you don't want them back, do you?
Yeah. And you don't want to go back, because now you have to face the Inquisition. I'll stay here, thank you. That's why we don't hear of them. They changed their names when they converted and just went native.
Yeah.
I'll go with that. They married, they were happy.
They ate all that lovely Moroccan food.
Oh, so good.
Okay, we'll go with that, although I suspect it might be considerably nastier than that. On his way home, Edward dropped in on the Portuguese court, since he hadn't visited King Zhao on his way down, for which he apologised. It must have got to him that King Zhao was a bit miffed about it, I should think, otherwise why bother? He was welcomed with feasts, bullfights and cane fights.
Cane fights?
So
What's a
nice.
cane fight?
Hitting each other with canes, I suppose.
Oh, never heard of that.
No. But it's generally sort of
Mean.
causing pain in some way, isn't it?
Somebody
That's
being mean to
entertainment.
somebody else. That's what it is.
Yeah. He offered one of Edward IV's daughters, I'm not sure which one, in marriage to the Duke of Beja. And presumably he had permission to do that. I wondered if he just got drunk. He said, you know who you should marry.
I have a
The Duke
lovely
said,
niece.
all right, yes, I will. And he woke up the next morning thinking, oh, God, how am I going to break that to Edward and Elizabeth? Edward Woodville arrived home from his crusading in August 1486, having been away for 7 or 8 months. He'd fulfilled his vow and lost his teeth. He was home in time to hold the canopy over baby Arthur at his christening.
Oh, right.
We're at that stage. Yeah, it seems like lots happened, and then suddenly, we're only at Arthur's birth. He then paid his men what was owed them.
Oh, that's nice. That doesn't always happen.
Yeah,
it's
there
so
weren't many
sad.
of them to pay because most of them were in Morocco.
But isn't it sad that the base minimum of honoring your paying your employees is a nice thing to do? That's a sad statement.
I think I'm seeing it worse than you again, because it made me think, where did he get the money from?
Oh.
It seems he didn't have much money of his own.
Right.
Because he never took up the Scales land. Ferdinand and Isabella were hiring soldiers, so it seemed likely it was their money that paid the soldiers.
Oh.
Which, whatever his high ideals about going on this venture, this vow, and I'm going to thrash the infidel, I would say pretty much makes Edward Woodville a mercenary.
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah. And something that occurred to me, I didn't see it anywhere, but occurred to me, was that Edward Woodville was the youngest of the 5 sons. We know about younger sons. Mm-hmm. We know that they joined marauding gangs and terrorised the neighbourhood. So maybe this was his version of that sort of rich large. I'm going to go to Spain and terrorise the Muslims. Henry VII pumped Edward Woodville for information about Spain and Portugal, and he asked him what impressed him most about Portugal. This isn't a joke this time, thankfully. Edward Woodville replied, oh God, we do hear what he says. Edward Woodville replies, quote, "The sight of a man who took orders from nobody and was obeyed by all," unquote. And I can't help feeling that Henry VII sort of pocketed that bit of information for later use.
Yes, really.
Because he did say he wanted to be feared, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And obeyed.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think he was thinking, obeyed by all. Well, the run-up to the Battle of Stoke, Edward Woodville was given the leading wing of the cavalry to command, and he came across to Leopold's troops outside Doncaster. He didn't have enough troops for a battle, so he used some of the tactics he'd seen while he was in Spain. One of these may have lacked finesse, but it seems to be very effective. It was to ride through a column of infantrymen at full gallop and then just keep going, keep out the way.
Oh, right.
And yes, and then they have to sort of pick themselves up and tend to their wounded.
Yeah.
Because if you get hit by a horse at full gallop.
Yeah.
So they just kept doing that. And they ambushed the supplies and attacked foraging parties. So anything to slow de la Pole's troops down and give Henry more time to array his army. So again, I'm getting the feeling of Chaucer's Night again, that I'm going to do the Battle of Stoke, and it just consists of riding through these poor, probably the Irish without their armour.
Oh, gosh.
Knocking them flat.
Yeah, and trampling them underfoot.
Yes. Ooh. I know, all's fair in love and war, but yeah. That's cowardly as well. You run over them and just keep going.
Yes.
And they carried on doing that for 3 days until they arrived near Northampton, when they joined up with Henry's troops. Soon after this, Henry VII was at Edward Woodville's place at Carisbrooke Castle.
Oh, so he did have somewhere.
He did have Carisbrooke Castle, yeah.
Okay.
And he had rights to strip wrecks of all their stuff. So I suppose... Yeah, I'm not saying... He's not on the breadline, but he's not your ludicrously wealthy nobles.
Right.
I think he's just got other fish to fry. He's more action
I prefer
than
to fight.
possession. Yeah. They were discussing the Breton situation, where Henry was in a difficult situation because he owed gratitude to both the French and the Bretons. And reluctantly, he had decided he wouldn't be able to help Brittany. And he sent out that proclamation saying that no Englishman, on pain of death, could leave the country.
Hey, Edward, come here. Come here.
It's pretty draconian, really. You're not allowed to leave the country, they'll kill you. And Edward didn't agree with Henry's decision.
Oh.
He was probably remembering how Duke Francis had given them safe passage after Henry had fled to France.
Right.
So, Edward Hall, writing in Elizabeth's reign, said, quote, "Sir Edward, Lord Woodville, a valiant captain and bold champion, either abhorring ease and idleness," which I think might be true, "or inflamed with ardent loyalty and affection towards the Duke of Brittany," could also be true, desired very earnestly of King Henry that he, with a convenient number of good men of war, should transport himself to Brittany to aid and defend King Francis, the king's good friend, unquote. Well, Henry was a politician. He was looking at the longer term and may have thought that although he owed thanks to Duke Francis, the country as a whole didn't owe thanks to Francis. And they were probably safer keeping France happy.
Yes.
Edward Woodville was not a politician. He was a knight, a sort of rush in and slash away with his sword.
Yes.
Sort out the consequences later sort of man. So, and as we said, there are two possibilities here. We know that Breton ambassadors went to the Isle of Wight and that Edward Woodville, after he'd talked to them, then started gathering men. And the general thinking has been that Edward Woodville disobeyed Henry's express prohibition.
Okay.
Which is a brave thing to do on pain of death.
Yeah.
But he was just so chivalric he couldn't leave Duke Francis in the lurch.
That's exactly what he is.
An alternative view is that Henry said, OK, off you go. But if anyone asks, I know nothing. Whichever it was, Edward Woodville headed off to Brittany with 404 tall and hardy men.
Okay.
440 tall and hardy men. The Duke of Brittany gave him a fleet of 4 ships. And for once the English Channel was quite benign, so they managed to get across without too much fuss. He wasn't the only one to go. There was another group of men who boarded a Breton ship in Southampton and commanded the captain to take them to Brittany, which he presumably was happy to do if they were going to fight for his country. So it wasn't just him. There were other people going off to fight. But the French were so furious when they heard that Englishmen were aiding Brittany that, as Virgil says, quote, the English ambassadors began to be fearful for their safety, unquote. One of whom was Christopher Urswick, who we looked at before. By the 5th of June, 1488, Edward Woodville and his men reached Rennes, where they were welcomed with 2 barrels of white wine and 2 barrels of claret. Later they had a banquet involving another barrel of white wine and another barrel of claret. That's a lot of...
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say, and then they stuffed them in the barrels of white wine and claret.
No, they were so happy to see them. Henry was quick to send a letter to France to try and dispel the rumours that he'd sent them there. He said that the Breton ambassadors had, quote, by their subtle ways and intrigue, so much exhorted and seduced him, Edward Woodville, that to our very great displeasure he went away with them to Brittany with some 300 men, most of whom he extracted from places of asylum where they had been for several years on account of their crimes and misdemeanours, and most of these men without armour, unquote. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? For a start, it's nothing to do with me, and also...
It wasn't me.
They're all criminals who haven't even got any weapons, so we've got nothing to worry about.
It's fine.
Yes. And not only are they criminals and unarmoured, they're probably very, very drunk after all that wine. Charles VIII didn't believe a word of Henry's denial, but as Edward Hall said, quote, he hid his anger and dissembled, according to the French custom, with a flattering smile, quote. It's fine, Henry, I know it's nothing to do with you.
Nothing.
The English ambassadors to France, probably much to their relief, came back to England via Brittany. And from what they told Henry of the situation, he concluded that nothing much would happen for a while. Maximilian had just been released from his confinement in the spice depot, and the French surely wouldn't risk his wading in to help the Bretons, so they probably would just leave it for a bit. And the French had actually just concluded a truce with Brittany, so everything was going to be okay.
It's okay. You're fine.
This was a sham on France's part. But Henry believed it, or easier to believe it, and so did the Breton troops, who packed up and went home.
Yep.
Oh, we've got a truce, great.
Awesome.
Let's go. The only people who were left to defend Rennes were Edward Woodville and his troops. Luckily, not everyone believed the French truce. Maximilian, you see, he's stepping up for once, sent 1,500 Swiss halberdiers.
Oh.
Ferdinand sent 1,000 men, and there were 1,500 Gascons. Henry then began to threaten to send more English troops, but it was all words, as Charles VIII knew full well.
Yes. Henry is great at not spending money. And that would cost money.
And pointlessly, from what he would say, I think. It's all right spending money if it's going to benefit either him or the country, but that's not going to benefit him.
No, not at all.
It's just going to get him into trouble.
Yes.
Edward Hall said, quote, King Charles had as little regard for the English threat as the biting of a flea. He knew his army was powerful and strong, and that the Bretons had but few Englishmen, with the Lord Woodville, for whom he cared little, unquote. Duke Francis gathered together all the leaders of the men and asked them what to do. And they were all for fighting immediately. Well, of course they were. That's what they've gone over there to do. They're not going to go home and say, oh, no, it's fine. It was all stop by the time we get there.
I need to loot something. I need to be paid.
Yes. I need to kill somebody. Edward Woodville commanded about 2,000 foot soldiers on the vanguard, all wearing the red crosses of English soldiers. Even though 1,700 of them were Bretons, it was thought to be more intimidating if the French thought they were all English. Obviously didn't think much of Breton soldiers.
Yeah.
28th June 1488, the Allied troops caught the French in an ambush. But for some inexplicable reason, they delayed the attack.
Okay.
You'd think that Edward Woodville would just go for it, which he must have been itching to do. Instead, he had to watch as the French took up battle positions.
Why let them get set up?
I don't know. And, Woodville was not happy about it. Obviously wasn't his idea. The infantry of Edward Woodville's Red Cross-wearing troops advanced en pointe, which I thought meant they all did it in ballet shoes, but apparently it's an arrow formation. Edward Woodville was at the tip of the arrow, and somehow he became cut off from the rest of his men. The chronicler Molinet wrote, quote, "The English archers showed great courage, for each of the opposing parties fought for victory." Well, yeah, that's what a war is, isn't it? I thought. The skirmishes developed into a hard and rough free-for-all. Bodies fell, blood flowed, unquote. And one of the bodies which fell was that of Edward Woodville. And despite their initial advantage, the Bretons lost the battle. And then there was a huge explosion in the woods behind them as their magazine blew up, which completely freaked them out, and the Bretons all ran away.
Ooh. And by the magazine, you mean all their ammunition, right?
Yeah.
That's not good. Did it kill people?
Don't know.
Okay.
But it certainly scared everyone enough that they just thought, what the hell's that? And just ran.
Yeah.
So they lost the battle.
Okay. Expected. Okay.
Edward Woodville's death was recorded by Spanish chroniclers, quote, "And there died many Bretons, Englishmen and Castilians who had gone to help them. And there died fighting the Count of Scales, since he would not surrender and be imprisoned," unquote. And I don't want to belittle his bravery, but if it was just a free-for-all, would there have been a chance to say, no, put my hands up here, I'm surrendering?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was even an option.
Probably not.
On the 20th of August, 1488, Duke Francis signed part of his country over to France, and soon after he died. Now that he'd won, Charles VIII could afford to be a conciliator, and he wrote to Henry VII saying, "Don't worry, I know that Edward Woodville went to Brittany without your permission." Quote, "We never had a single doubt of that," unquote.
Yeah. It probably had quotes in that statement, too.
Yes.
Just so you know.
Yep, we know you, Henry. We know you wouldn't fight for Brittany. Henry, seeing that the English blood had been spilt, rather belatedly decided to seek revenge on France and protect Brittany.
Oh.
That's not the time, is it? Because then you're just avenging blood spilt with more blood spilt.
Yes.
And then you've got to avenge that blood spilt.
Yeah.
Parliament raised £100,000 for the adventure.
Wow.
Partly using the Morton's Fork argument.
Oh, yes.
Which you then told us was Fox's Fork.
Fox's Fork.
And I then told you there was nobody's fork. There's no fork. However, the Bretons would have to pay the brunt of it. So Henry was grateful to Brittany and all they'd done for him, but they got to pay. However, in 1490, Brittany fell to France, and Anne of Brittany had to marry Charles VIII, and he wasn't very nice to her, was he? As you can hear over in Patreon.
Yes.
Tudoriferous Patreon. You know you want to.
Would Henry have put Edward Woodville to death if he'd made it back to England? Because he had made that proclamation on pain of death.
I doubt it. But he would have fined him.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he would have done. Whether he had told him to go or not, I mean, it seemed the situation had changed by that point anyway, if Henry was thinking of telling people he was going to go in. Which is different from thinking of going in. Ferdinand and Isabella wrote to Henry, quote, "The Count of Scales had gone to Brittany without permission of King Henry. As he is a faithful servant of Ferdinand and Isabella, they beg the king to forgive the Count," unquote. Oh. So we can see they held him in very high esteem.
Yeah.
You know, he lost his teeth for us.
Yes.
So, shall we rate
this
paragon of chivalry?
He does not sound chivalrous at all.
Actually, he sounded more chivalrous in the research. He sounded a lot less chivalrous when I came to say it out loud. The more I said, the more I kept thinking about Chaucer's Knight and how everything was done for money. Apart from getting his land back, but maybe he thought, oh, I can't be bothered. I'm not interested in doing lawyer stuff.
Yeah, no, nobody wants to do lawyer stuff. No. Okay.
Amphibole.
Intrigue. Well, whether he had Henry's permission to go to Brittany or not, it would have involved intrigue. Because either he was intriguing with Henry or behind his back.
Yes. And he had intrigued against Richard of York to go support Henry in Brittany.
Yes.
So that's big. That would have gotten him executed if he ever returned back to England with Richard still there.
Yes, especially since he had this fleet of ships that had been given to him by Edward IV.
Yeah.
And then Richard suddenly thinking, hang on a minute, he's going to use those against me, isn't he?
Yes.
I'm not sure, though, whether Edward Woodville ever did plan to do that.
Oh.
Probably not at that point. Maybe once he thought that little Edward was dead. Maybe. But then he did do it eventually because he came over with Henry.
Yes. Which is definitely intriguing. I'm going to give him a 6 because he's not using spies. He's not using codes or ciphers. But he does go against the crown quite openly. So I think a 6 is good.
Yes, I think so, because it's definitely intrigue. It's just not the darkened corners intrigue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 6.
Okay,
yeah.
so 12 for Amphibole.
Antiperistasis.
Rise and fall. Well, he had a lot to thank his sister for.
Yes, I was going to say, he rose by his sister, not his own actions.
He made himself useful after she had become queen.
Yes.
He didn't just sit back and enjoy the trappings of being the queen's brother.
True. But none of that really made him... Well, no, because he did... The problem is he technically keeps sort of the same status all the way through. Although you could argue that he lost everything when Richard takes the throne and gains it all back when he helps Henry take the throne.
Yeah. But I suppose that was the case for everybody. You had to take a side.
Yeah.
And either you were down, then you were up, then you were down, or you were up, then down, then up.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, he deserves something.
Yes.
Because
it was his actions that kept him going.
He made the choice. Well, I was going to say he made the choice to
to
rise up against Richard, but in fact, no, he didn't make that choice, did he? It was Richard effectively made the choice by extracting all the land from the Woodvilles and generally putting it about that they were sorcerers and murderers and adulterers and extortioners. Yeah, I don't think I can give him a lot because he got to where he was through his sister.
Yeah. I think a 3.
I'm going to give him 4 because, yeah, it was through his sister, but it was a big leap from just being a common and garden Woodville to being the royal family.
Yeah.
Still not a huge amount, but...
No. So 7 for antiperistasis.
Martyrdom.
He lost his teeth.
He lost his teeth. Yeah, and that was going over to fight what he saw as the common enemy of Christianity, isn't it?
And it meant he was in the vanguard. He was actually climbing the ladders to go over the wall, which is huge. Those are usually the people that die.
Yes, it shows he wasn't that high up in the nobility because they would have said, no, don't you go.
We watch other people die. You are not fodder.
Yes. Also, he fought for Brittany.
Yeah.
Which he didn't have to do.
So
if he decided to go against Henry to fight for him, and that's a huge martyrdom because Henry had said on pain of death.
yeah.
I think he deserves quite a lot.
Yeah. I'm going to give him a 9 because he didn't actually die.
He did die. He died in Brittany.
Oh, right. I'm still thinking the religious aspect of being in Granada.
Yeah.
Because that's, to me, more martyrdom.
Yeah, I don't want to give him a 10 because I think, being burnt at the stake, something like that, is a 10.
So I'm going to stick with the 9. He did put himself in harm's way. He did almost die in Granada. He did lose his teeth. And he kept on fighting. He didn't retire to something cozy and comfy.
No, he didn't.
Yeah.
No, I don't think he could. I think, was it Edward Hall who said he did it for the thrill? I think that's partly might be the case. I'll go with a 9 as well. It's a pity that his martyrdom consisted in killing people, but that's the sign of the times, I'm afraid.
That's 18 for martyrdom. He's doing well.
He's doing pretty well, yeah.
18.
0. What did he leave behind?
What did he leave behind? He was the youngest son. He didn't have huge swathes of property. He wasn't in a position to found universities or monasteries and things.
No, but I don't think he would have had any interest. Otherwise, he would have gone
I don't
after
think
the
so.
Scales land.
Yeah. He died young. He was about 30, 34.
goodness.
But he is described as the last knight to embody the chivalric ideas of knighthood.
I don't see it, though.
Yeah.
And if you ask anybody who Edward Woodville is, they'd say, who?
The Woodville bit. They'd say, oh, Elizabeth Woodville?
Possibly, yes.
The youngest brother. As a 10th child, he had a choice, really, doesn't he? The military or the church.
Yeah.
And he tried both. But I think he went for the right one, really. I couldn't see him being a priest. Tending to his flock.
No.
Yes. Killing his flock with a big sword, I could see him doing, but not attending to it. I think for a 1 for being a Woodville.
Okay. So it's a 1 for Betim, because I'm sticking with my 0.
Okay.
Flaunt a bleeding flaunt.
Right, I see your picture. And this is what he actually looked like. This is a very accomplished painting. I mean, you can really see this is Edward Woodville, can't you? It can't be anybody else.
Okay, so it looks like an illuminated
looks like a
manuscript.
child's
Yes,
drawing.
it's an illuminated manuscript kind of drawing.
Yeah.
I do find the armor interesting. So he's in armor. He's got a surcoat on with it looks like birds and a sun and a cross, red cross. The blue portion.
Oh, could that be the sun in splendour? Because Edward IV was sun in splendour, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, so, and the blue and white, could that be the fleur-de-lis? Would he have stolen that or used that on his surcoat? It's really hard to see.
It is. I don't know, the picture is not painted with that much detail. To work exactly what thing.
No, but the thing on the knee for the armor is pretty cool. What is that?
It is. Yeah, it's got some sort of butterfly clip at the back, isn't it?
Almost like it deflects it away from the horse.
Must be excruciating painful. He's kneeling, we should say he's kneeling on one knee, but it must be incredibly painful.
Yeah.
He's got that butterfly clip digging into the back of his leg.
Yeah. Interesting picture.
I like this picture.
Yeah, so do I.
I like this picture. Yeah.
Whether or not it's a likeness of him, I could never tell you.
Don't think we'd recognise him from this. He's got some sort of a pudding basin cut as well,
Yes.
isn't he? A bit of a fringe. Not the best look.
No.
But no, I do like the picture.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 6.
And it's the only one we've got.
I like it. It's got stuff that obviously represents him because it's his surcoat, which would be his family badge. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed to be weird copying each other here. But yeah, I think 6. I like that picture.
Okay, so that's a 6 for Flaunt-a-Flaunt, which gives us a total of course it's saying I don't have, a 44.
Oh, that's pretty good.
That's really good. He beat Lambert Simnel for sure, and Charles VII.
Charles the 7th? Charles the 8th or...
I think Charles VIII. I think I just spelt that wrong.
No, he'd have definitely beaten Charles the 7th.
Yes, Charles VII. Fix that.
Yeah, excellent. Well done.
Well done.
Well done, Edward.
Okay.
So, the next question
Oh,
is...
skipping ahead to picking your new person.
Are they too delicious or what?
And by me
not?
skipping ahead, I think you know my answer.
You don't think he is?
No.
Oh, but he did. He was so busy.
I don't care.
Busy.
I did not find him too delicious.
You don't get too delicious for being busy.
And there wasn't enough detail about him himself. There was a lot of his actions, but
no.
not him himself.
Yeah, I thought we got to know Edward, got to know Anthony Woodville
a lot better.
quite well, and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Obviously not Richard Woodville because he's even more shadowy. But I kept thinking he was like the John Cleese character in Holy Grail,
yeah.
who'd come in with his sword slashing away, and they'd have to apologise afterwards.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, sorry.
Sorry. Are we sorry?
Gosh, it's been over a year.
I know, I was just going to say, well, we're still over a year and still haven't picked anybody for Too Delicious. Okay, so.
Right, is the next one going to be the one? Our Too Delicious one.
Ooh, somebody I think is going to
go
be
on then.
good. John Paston.
Ah, okay. Yeah, he was going to be a cameo, but he's not now, is he? Because he's too important. Excellent.
John Paston, Senior.
Senior.
Yeah, because William Paston's
Senior.
his dad. So John Paston, and then John Jr.,
And then,
John Jr.
and then
B.
just a whole load of Johns.
Junior A,
a whole
Junior
bucket
B.
of Johns. Excellent. Okay.
That is the end of our episode on Edward Woodville, a.k.a. Edward Woodpile. We hope you have
But not Lord Scales,
Lord
because he had no right to that.
We hope you have enjoyed it and will join us for the next episode, which we don't know who it is on. Thank you for listening.
No. We have got a list somewhere, but I haven't got it here. You can find details of the podcast and contact us on...
To the riverist on WordPress.com. Email tudoriferus@gmail.com. We're on Podbean and all the usual platforms. Also Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
In the meantime, go wisely and slowly. Those who rush stumble and fall.
Give obedience where 'tis truly owed.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Where are me gnashers? Where are me pearly whites? I've lost me grinders, how am I meant to bite? What happened to me molars, me canines left in style? It's soup and gruel for me boys, I've lost me radiant smile. Oi! Have a banana milkshake.